All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Bowl podcast. Today, me, Nick, Ariel, preview and prediction for the 2023 Ohio State Buckeyes. Looking at this coaching staff, Ryan Day, 45-6 record through 4 seasons as the lead man. Brian Hartline, he's going to make that promotion up to offensive coordinator. Day will be stepping back from that position. 7th year with the Buckeyes, a former alum. His first year, of course, in this role, he'll remain the wide receiver coach also. And then Jim Knowles, his second season with the Buckeyes after coming over from Oklahoma State. Biggest off-season headline to watch with the Buckeyes, Nick, they returned 12 starters following complete heartbreak in the Peach Bowl against Georgia. You know, we both picked them to win that game. I said that the passing attack would absolutely flame Georgia's secondary, and that's exactly what happened, and they should have won that game, Nick, and that's why we're going to talk about heartbreak, because Georgia, they escaped. They were able to win that game in Atlanta, and they turned around and won by 50-plus points in the national title game. Ohio State fans, the coaching staff, the players, they all feel like they were this close to being national champions, and they weren't. Very tough offseason. This is going to be very hard for Ohio State to get past. That's going to be the biggest thing to watch coming into this year, is they are just going through complete emotional trauma, really, with what happened at the end of that game, Nick.
Ohio State fans feel they deserve to be in the national championship, and you and I both agree. You know, we both picked them, like you said. It was very obvious that Georgia's secondary was going to have some issues with this passing attack. You could see it early on. The warning signs were there. You know, of course, Georgia's defense is very good. Their front seven is fantastic, but their secondary left a little bit to be desired in certain points last season, and I saw that'd be a huge weakness. We both agreed that was a big weakness, and C.J. Stroud torched them. He was putting up great numbers, and really, if he didn't lose one of his star receivers to an unfortunate injury during the game, I think Ohio State still finds a way to win that game. They get tough end there, but overall, I think this is a huge offseason for them. You know, moving Brian Hartline into the offensive coordinator role and having Ryan Day kind of focus on just the day-to-day operations as a head coach and no longer calling the plays, I think is a huge X factor. I've said it earlier in the cycle of the offseason. This is the big key thing for me here. Hartline being able to step up and take that full-time role and allowing Ryan Day to kind of focus on other things around the program is huge for him. You know, Ryan Day is on the hot seat. I'm going to say it. I think he is on the hot seat. If they don't win the Big Ten this year, if they don't find a way to get into the playoff this year, he would most likely potentially lose his job. I mean, the fans in Columbus, they want to win a national championship, and you can't lose to Michigan. If they lose to Michigan, they can't lose Michigan 3 years in a row. The schedule, it's not very easy, but they should still go unbeaten. And Ryan Day's seat is definitely getting warmer. They want to win national championships in Columbus. The heartbreak is not going to last forever, and they want to be able to get through and break through the glass ceiling.
And looking at that offense, it's an A-plus unit now led by Hartline, the wide receiver coach, former NFL wide receiver, with plenty of production. Great understanding of the offense. He helped with the game plan all of 2022. So he was certainly groomed for this role. This is an offense where the routes generate plenty of space. Lots of corner routes, out routes, comebacks, some RPOs. The power run game attacks the inside. Look at the personnel they have. It's probably the deepest in America. Of course, C.J. Stroud, I was incredibly high on him the moment he arrived in Columbus, and he certainly exceeded even my expectations. Quarterback battle now is between two former 5-stars in Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. McCord, strong-armed, accurate leader, good under pressure. He rips the ball in the tight windows. Not very mobile, but he's very consistent downfield as a passer, 6'3", 222. Devin Brown, out of Utah, has that release, much more mobility than McCord. Looks like a gamer on the run, has a nice release. I think he was really praised as a good distributor at all levels at high school, and then, of course, in the spring game, touch and accuracy over the middle, along with that quick release. Those are all going to be big keys to this offense. So McCord will be the starter, but Brown certainly has those desirable traits that would certainly allow him to thrive in this unit.
I agree. I think McCord is the guy to start here. I really like what he has in his repertoire. I think he's a very solid quarterback. I think the size works for me. I'm a fan of the 6'3", 222. I think it's a great size. Devin Brown, I think, is a solid quarterback. I think McCord has the more experience here, looked good in the spring game. Not very mobile, but very consistent downfield. I like the accuracy a lot with McCord. I think he's got to be the guy to start here. Limited appearances last year. He had 80% completion percentage in limited appearance, 190 yards, and 1 score. So very small sample size over 7 games. But I think he looked good in those 7 games. Solid numbers and small sample size. I think McCord's got good size. I think he's a natural-born leader. He's been in the system for a few years now. He's a junior. He's learned the playbook. I think McCord has to take over here and be the guy to start for Ohio State. And I think Ohio State fans should be happy with him. I think he's a solid quarterback and better than some of the other teams that are replacing quarterbacks in the nation. I think this is a better option they have than some of those other teams.
No doubt. This is kind of just a QB factory in terms of just getting playmaking and production really at this moment in time. Good news is for these young quarterbacks is they do have a veteran running back duo led by Trevion Henderson. Kind of a forgotten player after he's beat up most of last year. Still has good breakaway speed, electric in the open field. Nice burst, mainly a one-cut back that kind of lacks creativity, but he is a solid pass catcher with some good contact balance. Big fan of his. Mayan Williams, a bulldozer mentality. physicality, good speed for his size of 5'9", 225. Has a strong lower half. A Marshawn Lynch running style, I would compare it to. Subtle movements with his feet. And also Dalton Hayden, he had gotten the go against Maryland, had 130 yards, 3 touchdowns, somewhere in that area. He's not as physical as his teammates, but he does hit the hole with speed, and he has great ball security. This running back group, Nick, it's being compared to the one in Ann Arbor, 1A and 1B, I guess you could call them. This is a offense that ran for 192 yards per game last season. One thing I wanted to see more out of, though, 2 years ago I called them out on how they only had 40-plus rushing attempts twice last year, or 2 years ago, rather. And certainly when you have a struggling defense, that's not great. And they certainly saw that number increase this past year, focused a lot more on the running game, trying to slow things down a little bit, which, can sometimes be a backdrop for your offense, but that's exactly what the defense needed. So I was very pleased to see that happen, I believe, 5 different occasions last season.
It certainly is important to have a good balance. I think that I put him at 1B right behind the Michigan rushing attack, and the Michigan just is a little more of a punch to it. I think Trayvon Henderson, if he can stay fully healthy. They only played in 8 games last year, but the numbers in those 8 games were pretty good. 571 yards rushing, 5.3 yards per carry, and 6 scores for him. Mayan Williams, a good back, a good leader there, 825 yards on the ground this past season, 6.4 yards per carry, and 14 scores for him. And Dallas Hayden is your number 3 back. He could be, even a 2 on a lot of group of 5, or be number 1 on a group of 5 teams, and number 2 or a high number 1, or high number 2 or a low number 1 on a lot of power 5 teams. Hayden is really good back. To have as your number 3 back, that's a very scary triple threat there. 553 yards on the ground for him last year, 5 yards per carry, and 5 scores. Very good trio here. I like the balance.
One thing that's not up for debate is that this is the nation's top receiving core. It's been like that the last couple years now. Marvin Harrison Jr., great blend of size, speed, and skill, acrobatic pass catcher, elite body control, good yard after catch ability, great route runner. At 6'4", 205, some people are calling him an A.J. Green type of player. Emeka Egbuka, another one of those 5 stars. He lines up in the slot a lot. He had 5 drops last year, so he needs to improve his focus a good bit. Covers ground fast and yards after catch. I also think he's a pretty good route runner who does a phenomenal job of finding the soft spot in zone. But Julian Fleming, he rarely played inside last year. Durability certainly hampered him in his career. This is a guy I believe was the top-ranked wide receiver recruit a couple classes ago. He has good size, 6'2", 205. Ball skills certainly check out. Another guy who's great route running. Lots of untapped potential there with Fleming. They picked up Lorenzo Styles from Notre Dame. Brendan Ennis, a highly ranked player who's very competitive, who's developed a good route tree, some quick feet. He explodes out of his release. He's destined to get on the field this year as a physical playmaker. And then Cade Stover at tight end. He's still new to the position, savvy athlete, pretty impactful as a vertical threat this past year. Good feel for finding some space in zone. He's a good blocker in space and on the move. Still needs to improve, timing and hand placement, length and consistency. Certainly need to be upped a little bit as well. But this is a guy with soft hands. He has a good yard after catch ability. He showcased a little bit of everything last year against Penn State, where he really boosted his stock. Top to bottom, Nick, there is no flaws in this receiving core. It's going to be tough to contain all year long.
0 flaws. This is the best receiving core in the nation. Columbus continues to produce incredible talent at wide receiver. Marvin Harrison Jr. has potential to be the number 1 wide receiver in the nation this year. 1,263 yards receiving, 16.4 yards per catch, 14 scores for him last year. Showing shades of his father in every asset of the game. Egbuka as well, fantastic player. 1,100 yards receiving, 15.6 yards per catch, 10 scores for him. Julian Fleming, 530 yards receiving, 15.7 yards per catch, 6 scores. Stover, he had 400 yards receiving, 5 scores. Then you even look at guys that are lower down the list. Jaden Ballard, Xavier Johnson, Lorenzo Styles. These guys are all incredible as well. These guys are very talented. That's just 6-7 guys right there that can really catch passes and put up a lot of yards for you. That's not even mentioning the true freshman recruits that are coming in on the roster as well. Guys like Noah Rogers, Brendan Ennis. This is an incredible group, top to bottom. There's so much talent here. This offense is certainly an A+ for this reason. This wide receiving core is the best in the nation. It's not even close.
Carnell Tate and Xavier Johnson, like you said, a versatile player. They got plenty of options here. The biggest concern of this offense is the offensive line, just because they replaced 2 bookend tackles, and I'm not really sure that they have the capacity to try to fill those gaps. Ohio State has some worries they may not have 4 starting caliber offensive tackles on this roster. They added Josh Simmons from San Diego State. He had allowed 24 pressures a season ago. Zen Mikowski, he's a hard worker. He's been developing for the last 2 years. Above average length, he's 6'7", 310. Good athlete with some nice bend and quickness. How he plays with added weight will certainly be a question mark. Josh Fryer, he struggles with balance and consistent hand placement, tends to play too high, especially when he's hit with a nice punch in the chest. He's likely to be a tackle. Looks more fluid at tackle with some good lateral agility, and the hands definitely seem more comfortable out there. The rest of this offensive line is still a bit of an issue. Jacob James at center missed spring due to injury. Victor Curtis comes over from Louisiana Lafayette. He was flat out awful for them. Donovan Jackson, a good run blocker. He latches on inside, powers back with leg drive. He can get caught with flat-footed with minimal length and pass pro. Matthew Jones, he's a bit slow out of his stance, so the hand placement is inconsistent, sustainable to swim moves, struggles with some balance. Stops defenders in tracks, he has a little bit of drive. He anchors pretty well, though. Hit a 19 PFF pass blocking grade against Georgia, Nick. Had 5 hurries. Does a very good job of getting to the second level, getting square. Sound player overall in Matthew Jones. I like what they have at guard. The rest of this offensive line, though, is really iffy.
I agree. This is a very interesting offensive line. Matthew Jones, fantastic at right guard. Donovan Jackson as well. I'd like to see him step up. I think he's got so much potential. Very talented player there as well. Good run blocker. I like the size, 6'4", 300. So the 2 guards I think are fantastic. It's tackles that really start to kind of concern you. Left and right tackle. Josh Simmons should probably hold down that right tackle spot if they're transferring in from San Diego State. But I get a little concerned, bringing in a transfer like that. And then Josh Fryer out there on the left side. I worry about him as well. I'm not entirely sure if I've seen enough. The balance there just isn't there. Very inconsistent. Doesn't really play where he needs to. The hand motions, it's a little too high for me. I need to lower that. I love the size at 6'6", 315, but I just think that he's not fluid enough. I get a little concerned there. That's my biggest worry, is that left tackle spot. Certainly, I think Jackson can help him on that left side, but it's a pretty young left side you're looking at there, as well as, center, up in the air about center as well. So I certainly think this offensive line is not where it used to be. And if there's going to be any flaw in this offense, it's the offensive line. If they start to show sort of issues early on and don't give McCord the time to kind of focus and read the plays and develop himself and get comfortable, they could be in an issue in a couple of these games against some of these bigger teams if he has to make decisions quick in the pocket and make errant throws.
Victor Curtis went to Louisiana Monroe, not ULL. But they had a lot of swing and misses this offseason in the portal, Nick, for this offensive line. Again, Curtis and Simmons the only adds, and those guys were pretty below average, if not flat out terrible. So what's the kind of vision here? Because I think they're very concerned about this offensive line. I'm only going to worry about it in games against maybe, a Penn State or a Michigan. I think all year long they'll be fine, maybe even Wisconsin. So the tougher opponents will certainly be something to monitor. But overall, this is not going to plague them, I don't think, until we get into the gritty of things against these tougher opponents.
Like I said, I think it's going to be a bigger issue against your Penn States, your Wisconsins, your Michigans. That's going to be the issue here. I think Kyle McCord might struggle to find that sort of pocket presence that he needs. He's going to find himself under pressure, especially from that left side. I think they're going to have to find a way to hit the portal. I think they have to hit the portal in the next offseason and bring in some pieces. Or really, they lost a lot of guys to the draft. They lost guys in and out of the team. They really just did not seem to fill up that potential they needed to fill up and kind of lock down that offensive line. This is the first time in a while I'm concerned about the offensive line. I think this is the first time in a while you're also concerned about the offensive line, because they're normally pretty solid in Columbus. They're going to have to find a way to kind of amp up the recruiting and as well as try and hit the portal here and grab some better pieces in the future. But there's not much you can do about it now. You got to just hope these guys can step up and play up to the levels that they expect.
Now looking at the defensive side of the ball, big-time improvement year this past season. They did still struggle, though, against Michigan and Georgia. So when it comes to playing against tougher opponents, the numbers are certainly skewed to the downside for them. In the portal, they lost 6 guys, 3 of them in the secondary. They added 3, 2 from Ole Miss. We'll get to them a little later. They do return 5 starters, though, and they got off the field a lot more than they did in 2021. Man-free blitz was a big staple of that. This defensive line, I think, is one of the nation's best. Jack Sawyer, he's expected to emerge this year as a former high-end recruit. I believe he was a number 1 recruit in his respective class. GT Tuimoloau, this guy really emerged this past season for them, an aggressive pass rusher. The motor's a little inconsistent, but he's an impressive athlete for his size of 6'4", 272. Good power, really impressive burst off the line of scrimmage. I love his length, the leg drive, the hand placement. He always beats polling tight ends or offensive linemen. He's really good at getting into the backfield. Even though he didn't showcase great disruptiveness against the run, his pursuit isn't all that great, but he does have lateral agility. I think some of those things, once they clean up, JT is going to be a phenomenal player this year. Look on the interior, Michael Hall, a great penetrator with power and quickness, good rep, pretty nimble athlete. 4.5 sacks before October 8th. He had none after that and was still the team leader. That's plenty of reason for concern, not just with Hall, but with this entire unit. Tyleik Williams, another one on the interior. Nice explosion out of his stance, good at getting around the shoulder, has active hands. He gets them up versus the pass. He has a nice core of, build and strength, 6'3", 315. I'm a big fan of this defensive line, Nick. I think they have great talent. 2 former 5-stars coming off the edge. They're expected to produce this year. I think on the interior, they have pretty good depth as well. Tywan Malone comes over from Ole Miss. Ty Hamilton's a veteran. I'm very happy with this defensive line top to bottom. The production's been absent, and that's something they need to refine this year.
They certainly have to step up the production. There is some serious talent. JT Tuimoloau is a very talented player, really gets after the quarterback, very good in the backfield, 28 total tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks for him. Jack Sawyer, good numbers out of him, 24 total tackles this past season, 6.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Williams as well, 21 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. Michael Hall, a very solid piece. I like him a lot in the interior. 19 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Ty Hamilton, kind of a bit and piece player. He could step up certainly this year. He had 15 total tackles this past season. Overall, this defensive line is very solid. I like this group a lot. There's a lot of potential here. I just need to see a sack number certainly increase. The sack numbers have not been where they really need to be. They got to definitely potentially get those numbers up and add a couple more sacks to this list, because I think that's going to really be the one thing that's kind of hampering this front seven, is getting the quarterback in the dirt. They got to find a way to get those sacks, complete plays.
Yeah, and that Jack Hybrid position, they're looking for that to make a return. Wasn't utilized all that much this past year, not at all late in the year. It's kind of a roving linebacker who has some versatility. That's kind of a staple in Knowles' defense. And we'll talk about the coverage here in a minute, because they definitely had some differences there also compared to what Knowles usually runs out. But I think overall this is a very solid front six. You look at the defensive line, I'm infatuated with it. The linebacking core, I think, is going to continue to improve. Tommy Eichenberg, I was highly critical of his 2 years ago. He must have heard me, because he had a massive improvement this past year. Did a great job at filling run lanes, good eyes, translated the coverage, great anticipation, showcased great closing speed. All those things I just named off, he was not good at one bit in 2021. So Eichenberg stepped up big this year for this defense. Steele Chambers, he played over 1K snaps the last 2 years, really starting to take shape at linebacker in terms of fundamentals and understanding position, converting from their running back position, angles, his pursuit. Those things are certainly going up a little bit. Does a good job of shooting gaps as an extra body. He's not the most fluid guy in space. That's at 6'2", 232. He's a solid run defender. Not exactly a havoc wrecker, but again, I think he's going to continue to progress. Still pretty new to the position. You also have Cody Simon. This guy could be a more violent hitter for this football team. Nice quickness, instinctive. He's rangy in the box with some good angles. Not much of a pass rush asset, though. And then CJ Hicks. Expected him to get on the field last year, but they did so well they didn't need to get him on the field. Special teams was his calling this past year. Soaked in lots of knowledge. Former 5-star, is pretty fluid in space himself with good ball skills. He's a coverage asset, and I also think he has some explosion as a pass rusher. Looking for Hicks to get involved this year. Maybe he can play that kind of rover position, the jack position for Ohio State. What are your thoughts on this linebacking core? A lot of different moving pieces here. A former running back, a guy who was awful in 2021, who's now a superstar, and a former 5-star also in the fold.
Very talented linebacking core. Eichenberg has really come into his own and is that star they needed. 120 total tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Incredible numbers for him. Steele Chambers, I like him a lot. 77 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. They're your top 2 returning tacklers right there. Very good numbers for him. Chambers had 2 interceptions as well. I think that's impressive numbers. Cody Simon, 32 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Simon, sort of a little bit not too bad at all for kind of rotating in and out. And CJ Hicks, a big special teams guy, like you said, but he has potential at linebacker. I like to see him get some more snaps this year. He played in all 12 games, only had 6 tackles, did not get a whole lot of time at linebacker. I think he's a very talented player to have, very underrated player. A lot of potential of CJ Hicks, certainly. If he doesn't step up this year, it'll be the year after, but he's a very talented player overall.
You look at the secondary, it's probably going to be the biggest concern with this football team. Jim Knowles, before he arrived, this was mainly a defense that operated out of a single high look. They now look at, a variety of different ones, mainly cover 3. Cover 1's still heavily used, maybe to the lack of personnel, but I thought they were actually quite good in that coverage scheme this past year. Look at some of the guys they have. Denzel Burke certainly didn't have the greatest of seasons as expected, but he still has length. He's a confident player in press. He has the quickness to mirror underneath. Has some good closing burst. The ball skills certainly check out. Technique needs a little bit of work, and sometimes he gives up a little bit too much cushion on off-man coverage. He's not exactly a strong tackler early, and that's certainly a backdraw of him playing off-man. Then you look at Jihad Carter, a corner who arrives from Syracuse, versatility, the experience in a 3-safety system. He made plays versus the run in the box and in 3 deep. Much better tackler than the 3 starters for Ohio State from a season ago. He's going to come in and make an impact right away. He understands route concepts. He can navigate his way through traffic, great ball skills. He's probably going to play the slot for them. Jihad Carter, I think, is going to make a phenomenal impact for them this year. Davison Igbosun from Ole Miss. He was a quality coverage asset as an outside corner for Ole Miss. So I certainly think they're starting to shore up some of these positions, Nick. And then you look at the safety group. Sonny Styles, a 5-star, they're looking to get involved. 6'4", 220. That's some pretty unique size. Of course, Javonte Williams over at Miami has similar size, and he was really good for them this past season. Impressive, fluid runner, strong lower body, athletic skills to be a defensive back. But again, his size calls for him being a linebacker. Physicality is a question, and that I think we'll eventually figure out where he plays at. And then Lathan Ransom. He did very well in coverage versus some of the nation's best tight ends this past year. He's a willing tackler in the box. He hits with some authority, good route recognition. The closing speed, I think, is certainly pretty solid. Very inconsistent in coverage, though, due to some poor vision. More complex route combos certainly led to some slower progression from him. He doesn't do the greatest of job shedding blocks. A lot to take in there, Nick, but I think this is a secondary that certainly is going to see some more improvements this year. That was the expectation last year. We waited until the end of the year to find out, and, well, Michigan carved them up.
I agree. I think this is a secondary that needs to continue to step up. This is a good group overall, but they have to step up to hit that greatness level. Ransom, I like him. 74 total tackles for him, 3.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Pretty solid numbers. Burke, I like him a lot too. 34 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss for him. Proctor, another guy. I think there's a lot of underratedness with Josh Proctor. I think he could potentially be involved. I think he's a piece that you're looking at. Right. Yeah. Solid piece that you're looking at. I think he's very talented. 21 total tackles for him, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Cameron Martinez at nickelback, I think he's a good player. You kind of throw him in there. 15 total tackles for him. Sonny Styles, underrated player. Didn't really get on the field last year as a true freshman, but I think he's got a lot of potential as a former 5-star. 9 total tackles for him. Then Jihad Carter, one of the better pieces on that Syracuse defense last year. There was a pretty good Syracuse defense, especially in the secondary. And Carter, I think he has extreme versatility. Very experienced player coming over from Syracuse. Fits in perfectly here. I think the size of him, 6'2", 198 is fantastic. I think the secondary will step up and continue to improve. I don't think they were bad by any stretch of the imagination last year. 200 pass yards per game is not a bad number at all, but they could certainly get that below 200.
That's going to be an A- for me. I love the D-line. I think the linebacking core is very interesting, led by a superstar in Eichenberg. And then again, that secondary certainly has some good moving pieces. I think they'll have some improvement, but we'll have to see it first before I make a big conclusion. A- for me. I think once the secondary can get back to where it was, at least, in the past, which has been a long time since they really had that DB factory, then I'm going to leave it at an A- for now. And I think moving forward, that's exactly where this grade will probably be until we see some improvements.
I think an A- is a fair grade. It certainly could potentially raise to an A if the secondary lives up to the expectations that I certainly have for them. But I get concerned sometimes with the secondary. I think there is some question mark. Overall, it's a very good defense. I think they've stepped up and they've grown under Jim Knowles and are continuing to get better.
Looking at the schedule preview and prediction, new offensive coordinator, no problem. Brian Hartline clearly understands the principles of this offense. He's going to do a great job in that role. Nation's best unit with a deep supporting cast. Of course, this quarterback battle will be maybe something to monitor, but I'm more worried about the offensive line and those 2 tackle spots. Should be more than serviceable up front, though. The defense has a great front 6. They should raise the ceiling this fall. The secondary still an iffy, prove-it type of unit, but have some good football players. 12-0 for this football team. Both sides show great efficiency. Expecting true dominance on the D-line. Well, the offense will be too much for most opponents to hold up. I'm looking at the schedule, Nick. A lot of people are going to say it's probably a little bit too easy. I think this is an interesting one. Week 3, you play Malachi Corley, Austin Reed, a high-flying passing attack. That's going to be chest to the secondary we were just talking about early on. They're obviously going to win the game. It'll be something fun to watch. The next week, they play at South Bend. The Maryland team I'm kind of high on. They get to host them. They, battled them for 60 minutes last year. At Purdue, West Lafayette's not been an easy place for some teams over the last couple years. And then they have a back-to-back against Penn State at home, and then at Wisconsin. That's going to be a big game. You've talked about Ryan Day potentially being on the hot seat. Well, the guy coming for his job is going to be Luke Fickell. It's going to be a massive game there. And obviously the 2 games at the end of the year, at Minnesota, at Michigan. There's no way they lose to Michigan 3 years in a row, right, Nick?
I mean, they can't lose Michigan 3 years in a row. Ryan Day would lose his job. They lose Michigan 3 years in a row. I think that'd just be absolutely unacceptable to happen, especially with the way they lost at home last year. You can't lose on the road here. It's a tough spot to be in, certainly with the series. Potentially 3-game skid on the series. The final 3rd game being on the road. It's a tough place to play Ann Arbor. They're going to be hyped there, but Ryan Day will lose his job, in my opinion. Lose to Michigan. You can't do that. You cannot afford to do that if you're Ohio State. It certainly is a tougher schedule than you think on paper, because at Notre Dame, you never know what you're going to get with them. South Bend, tough place to play. Clemson lost there a few years ago. I know Trevor Lawrence wasn't playing, but Clemson lost there a few years ago. So certainly gave Ohio State a tough game last year at home. So certainly a lot of question marks there. At Wisconsin, we've been talking about that one all year, it seems, ever since they made the move and they that's certainly one that everyone's be watching. At Minnesota, you never really know with Minnesota on the road. That kind of late in the season, you could really get caught there. They get Purdue earlier in the season. They got Purdue on November 18th. I'd be saying upset alert potentially, because the Purdue late season upset is just seems to be written in their script every single year. Purdue in October, I think they kind of get a little lucky dodging them there, in my opinion. Maryland as well, very talented team that we both are very high on. I'm going to go 12-0. I think it's a safe pick right now. I think they'll be in the playoffs. This team has too much talent not to make the playoffs. And if they don't make the playoffs, complete utter failure. And Ryan Day, the conversation is going to have to start to talk about whether or not he should keep his job if they miss the playoffs. I certainly think the seat is getting very hot. And I think if they have a disappointing this year, that seat is very, very hot.
It is important to note Jeff Brom's no longer at Purdue, so maybe things will be a little bit different. He's off to Louisville. At Minnesota, November 18th, Joe Rossi, Brian Hartline, Ryan Day. That's going to be a fun little chess match there. The defensive coordinator there for the Golden Gophers is one of the most underrated in the country, and they could potentially get caught sleepwalking as they're prepared to take on Michigan in Ann Arbor. So I think there's a lot here to digest with this Ohio State schedule. I don't think it's easy any bit. Obviously, there's plenty of cakewalks on here, like Indiana, Youngstown State, Rutgers. I think Michigan State doesn't have a chance either. So definitely some games to watch, some not to watch. 12-0 for me. This team will be in the playoffs. Maybe national champion. We'll make a prediction on that in about a month. That's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me to talk about the Buckeyes.
Certainly excited for this year for Ohio State. Incredible offense that looks to put up a ton of numbers. Defense is getting better over time. Jim construct his strong defense. Excited to see what he can do this year. This is a very exciting Ohio State team. They certainly will be involved in the national championship conversation. And one of us is probably in the national championship at this point. Very talented team overall. Very interesting to see how it goes.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.